This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. Well, in the new season of Trump POTUS, a blockbuster book threatens to ruin the friendship between the president and his erstwhile Svengali.
I like it.
I like the opening episode. I can't wait to see how the season ends. It's got me hooked.
It has everybody talking. I mean, this new book that came, it's coming out soon, but Fire and Fury by Michael Wolff, who was just granted such amazing access to the White House. According to ABC News, they said he had interviewed 200 people that were close associates of President Trump's and was always at the White House. And reporters always wondered, why was he there? Well, now we all know why he's there.
With some of the excerpts released to tease out the book, which is already topping the charts on Amazon, President's displeasure with members of his inner circle, including Steve Bannon, suggesting that Steve Bannon was disloyal, not to mention he always looked like crap. It sounds like something Trump might point out. And Steve Bannon, of course, got a few shots off as well that led the White House to respond over the top, frankly, both Press Secretary Sarah Sanders as well as the president himself in a lengthy statement.
Yeah, he thinks that Don Jr. is utterly and totally screwed because of that meeting that he had in the Trump Tower. He said that he's going to crack like an egg on national television. He called that meeting at the Trump Tower treasonous, unpatriotic, and bad blank. He also said that Ivanka is as dumb as a brick, and he does not like Jared Kushner and says that Jared Kushner might be involved in a money laundering scheme.
And the statement from Trump, all 265 words of it. Steve Bannon has nothing to do with me or my presidency. When he was fired, he not only lost his job, he lost his mind. Steve was a staffer, the deepest cut of all, who worked for me after I'd already won the nomination by defeating 17 candidates. Now he's on his own. Steve is learning that winning isn't as easy as I make it look. Steve had very little to do with our historic victory, which was delivered by the forgotten men and women of this country. Yet Steve had everything to do with the loss of a Senate seat in Alabama held for more than 30 years by Republicans. Steve doesn't represent my base. He's only in it for himself. And on that last statement, even those who are critics of Trump, at least within GOP and conservative circles, seem to agree with the president about Bannon's particular interest, which is self-aggrandizement.
Yeah, and he thinks very highly of himself. But, I mean, they're saying that President Trump never thought that he was going to win, that his face turned white when he heard that he won the presidency, that Melania was in tears. Kellyanne Conway, they said, was interviewing for a TV job. Nobody expected President Trump to win, or Donald Trump, then candidate.
And then those forgotten men and women made their opinions known. For more on this topic and what's next on the president's policy agenda, we're pleased to be joined by Matt Continetti, who is the editor of Washington Free Beacon and also a contributing editor for the Weekly Standard. Matt, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So this is not kind of new ground that is being trod here with respect to a book coming out on the president while in office from a former ally or current/former ally that includes things that are critical of him. But the nature of this would be like year two, Rove and George W. Bush being at war. I wonder what you think the medium-term implications beyond kind of the 2-week publicity tour for the book are for President Trump.
Well, with President Trump, I've never tried to predict that far ahead in the future. So
Yes.
It's hard to say what the medium-term implications are. This is a book that is detonated in Washington. President Trump's the ultimate disruptor. There are plenty of books that where former aides badmouth their bosses in the past, going back to the Reagan years. And also there are plenty of books that are reporting or purport to be reporting of inside White House intrigue that kind of set Washington aflame. The difference in this case is the president. And that is, while those earlier tell-all books kind kind of made a big stir in Washington. Never has a president before reacted in quite the way that Donald Trump did. And, of course, we should begin to just expect that Trump is different from all of our earlier, or especially in the modern era, presidents. So his reaction, I think, is what is unique and telling about this.
But while we were sleeping, I mean, Trump's attorney sent a cease and desist order to Steve Bannon.
Right, exactly.
I mean, that's kind of a big deal.
That's not something, say, that President George W. Bush did when his former press secretary, Scott McClellan, released a tell-all in his second term bad-mouthing him. So here, yet more evidence that Donald Trump is unlike many of his predecessors.
Yeah, I'm thinking of David Stockman during Reagan, and there's so many examples of this, but you're right, the response is different, and I wonder if the response is different, because of the nature of the individual, but also because he sees this as an opportunity, that, this is an opportunity for loyalists to dig in even deeper for Trump, for those that, had some utility for Bannon's vis-a-vis his advancing Trump's interests or Trump's policy agenda or Trump-supported candidates, fine, okay. But this further consolidates that base support, and frankly, it distanced themselves from Bannon, who's held up by the left as like the poster boy for the alt-right.
Right. I mean, Bannon has been, I think, getting on Trump's nerves for months now. I think it began when Bannon appeared on the cover of Time magazine, and when Saturday Night Live began referring to Bannon as President Bannon. Both those things annoying Trump greatly, because Trump, of course, is the star of his own show, and rightly, in the fact that Bannon is someone who joined the campaign pretty late in the game, probably helped with messaging in the final months, there's no question, but I mean, the reason Donald Trump is president, for good or ill, is Donald Trump. It's not any of his advisors. And so I think Trump was further annoyed throughout last spring and summer when it was pretty clear that Bannon was leaking extensively to the media. And you can just go through the reporting and you'll see either Bannon quoting on deep background or people being described as senior White House sources or sources close to Bannon. Pretty clear it was Bannon. So that annoyed Trump further and is probably the main reason why Bannon was pushed out in August after Bannon randomly called up a liberal journalist and badmouthed administration policy on Korea to a liberal journalist on the record.
Yeah, right.
So Bannon and Trump have kind of been heading for a confrontation for some time, and then Bannon crossed the red line in these latest quotes to Michael Wolff, the author of this new book, where he went after Don Jr. And Jared Kushner. So he went against the Trump family, which is something that obviously the president could not handle.
President Trump cannot handle when people, threaten his son and his son-in-law, both who were at that meeting. But in Michael Wolff's book, he said that he would have conducted the meeting, but just not at Trump Tower. So what does that say?
Well, I really don't know. I mean, a lot of these things, I'm just beginning to read some of the anecdotes in the book. And, one thing that struck me just reading the latest excerpt, which was released today, is there's a source, they're quoting in the book, it's quotation marks around Laura Trump, who is Eric Trump's wife, something she said. But then the quote is attributed to an anonymous friend of hers. So there are some issues, I think, with the sourcing and the reporting of the book. Let's remember, for months, especially prior to John Kelly's elevation as chief of staff, we were getting this sort of tabloidy, anonymous leak reporting, just kind of flooding, a flood of it from the White House. And that is really kind of what is happening in this book as well, because Wolff was there during the most chaotic months of this administration, which is the months leading up to John Kelly's appointment as chief of staff.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the other, you've also had, just to further the point you were making about some aspects of what's already been released being challenged. A friend of Trump, Tom Barrack, who's characterized as saying that Trump is an idiot, said he never said anything of the sort to Michael Wolff like that. So there are some people challenging how they're being quoted or how their positions are being characterized in the book.
Right, and remember, I mean, really, not only did Bannon go after the family in those quotes, it was about that June 2016 meeting in Trump Tower with the Russians, with Don Jr. and Manafort and Kushner, and Bannon described it as treasonous.
Yeah.
And then
Right.
went further to say that Mueller was going to crack Don Jr. like an egg. Now, Bannon is not denying those quotes. And that, I mean, and he's saying these things while he's working for the president. That's what's even more amazing.
He's saying
so
he would have contacted
clear
the
that
FBI.
Bannon was not the most trustworthy figure or someone that you really wanted to be associated with. And remember, of course, even after he left the White House, he was kind of responsible or helped move along the Roy Moore debacle in Alabama. So there's plenty of reasons for Donald Trump to be annoyed at Steve Bannon.
Well, and also, I mean, Bannon may have talked himself into more scrutiny by Team Mueller with the statement the statement that it's a money laundering operation from Manafort to Kushner and Trump Jr. I mean, there's no evidence to support that. It's a rather jarring thing to say. And, okay, Steve, what else do you got? Let's hear it out if that's the conclusion that you're drawing as you're sharing.
No, you're absolutely right. And I found it interesting, actually, earlier in the week, the New York Times released that big story kind of giving the FBI's view of how the Russia investigation got started. And talking about George Papadopoulos, the foreign policy advisor. And buried in that piece was a sentence I had never read before in the New York Times, which said, Steve Bannon declined to comment. And so that also, it was so novel to me that it made me think, Bannon might have more questions to answer about the Russia story than we've been led to believe.
So what's his role going to be going forward for Republicans? Is he persona non grata now, or what's going to happen?
Well, I think he was always persona non grata among a lot of the establishment figures in the party. His real base of support was his relationship with Trump, which is clearly broken, and then his relationship with the Mercer family, who are very powerful donors and who are really aligned with the more populist elements of the party. That reporting seems to suggest that relationship is also beginning to fray. So Bannon has Breitbart, but a website, being the editor of the website, I can say this. A website is not really the way to be a power broker in the GOP. You need kind of stronger relationships. So this may be a decline in Bannon, at least for the foreseeable future.
Well, even with respect to Breitbart, I wonder how that enterprise goes forward. But, you see people, and not in the comment section. Trump Jr. made the point the comment section is all kind of anti-Bannon and pro-Trump in response to Bannon's comments. But I mean, the Breitbart has been a real organ for the administration, and if Bannon is departing from that perspective on President Trump, how does that how does that outlet go forward?
Well, I mean, if there's one thing to remember in D.C. these days, is there's one figure who's important, and that's Donald Trump. And the moment you begin to think that you are more important than Donald Trump is the moment when I think things start slipping away from you. And it's clear that Bannon really took on the sense that he was actually, more than being responsible for Trump, he was actually more important than Trump, and that is certainly not the case.
Matthew Continetti, editor of the Washington Free Beacon and contributing editor to the Weekly Standard. Matt, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with